Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. This is Joe with the Local Search Association, and I'd like to welcome all of you to LSA's webinar series. Today's webinar is titled Reaching the Growing Number of Digital-First Consumers, and will be brought to you by our guest presenter, Paul Plant from Radicle Consulting. With that, let's get started. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody, wherever you're joining from. I'm speaking to you from London, where it's early evening. We've had the hottest day of the year so far, which for some of you may be fairly cool. It's only 79 degrees, but let me tell you, for an Englishman, that's a pretty nice day where I live. The topic is around what I call a digital-first group of consumers, a group of consumers who pretty much live their entire lives by technology. And there's quite a bit to cover, so I'm gonna skip through it, and hopefully it may stimulate some interest and some questions by the end. Just to begin very quickly, a little bit about myself. For those of you who don't know me, I've lived my life pretty much entirely in this industry. I was in the local newspaper industry when I first got out of college, then spent pretty much 20 years plus with BT and with Yale in both the US and the UK, and 5 years ago I got out of that, and I've worked closely alongside the industry ever since. I do a little bit of work with the Kelsey Group, obviously with the Local Search Association, and with a few publishers all around the world, where we talk about this whole topic of digital transformation, how we can keep this business salient for our customers, and all the aspects of change that surround it. In terms of my motivation for writing a recent consulting paper on this topic, stems back to some debate that was going on back in the UK earlier this year around the composition of today's modern boardrooms. And for me, the debate was all around the wrong topic, because it was all around the topics of diversity and equality, and why don't we have enough women in senior office. And, I'm not sexist or racist by any means, but around the same time, another report that got hardly any publicity came out by a company called CA Technologies, and they did a survey of chief information officers and chief technology officers of some of the FTSEs, the London Stock Exchange's leading companies. And this survey revealed a staggering insight for me that said 80% of respondents were concerned that the top-level leadership team in their companies were not digitally literate. And my motivation, therefore, for writing this paper is less around, do we have the right gender mix in our boardrooms today, but more importantly, just do we have the right people running our companies? Because we have most people acknowledge that the 16 to 34-year-old age demographic is the one that everyone wants to get hold of. If you look at the average age of the boardroom in most FTSE or Fortune 500 companies, I think the average age is 57. So there seems to be a generation gap somewhere. And it kind of endorses some work that I'd seen and been involved in that was conducted by the MIT Sloan University in Massachusetts a couple of years back, that digitally mature companies will significantly outperform their peers. And particularly in the three measures of revenue generation, market valuation, and profitability. So I think the whole concept of getting today's modern companies prepared for the digital onslaught is still, for me, a major issue, and hence why we have this session this evening. Just want to begin with putting it in a little bit of context, and I'm not going to dwell too much on these numbers. As you can see, they're all pretty big, and just to sum them up, more than a third of the entire planet's population is now online. More than a quarter of the global population engages in social media. And mobile penetration is pretty much 100%. And according to eMarketer, global smartphone sales in 2014 are going to reach something like $1.75 billion. It could be around 25% of the total population. And research by Business Insider confirms this growth in smartphone and tablet sales. Smartphone penetration, as I say, at 25%, now exceeds that of PCs, which is around 20%, and tablet penetration is 6%. In fact, tablets are presently registering the fastest adoption rate of any technology. To put that into context, it took the smartphone 4 years to reach 6% global penetration. The tablet has achieved that in just the past 2 years. So there's little doubt that technology is affecting the way that consumers behave, and I, along with many other observers, put that down to one device above all other, and that is the smartphone. According to Gartner, of the 1.8 billion phones sold in 1.8 billion mobile phones sold in calendar year 2013, 54% of those, 1 billion of them, were smartphones. Between a quarter and a third of all phones in circulation are smartphones. And that's before we've even really started to penetrate the large markets in Asia of India and China, where the proportions are naturally just going to go even higher. If you take the developed Western world, mainly Europe and North America, mobile phone penetration currently stands at 128%, with smartphones accounting for about 2/3 of all sales. So I just pictorially try and show you a piece of research. I worked with one of the divisions of Telefonica here in Europe, and they did some research, some consumer research a couple of years back around the impact of smartphones. They showed that smartphone penetration is not only confirmed at around 2/3 of consumers, but 94% of the people who have a smartphone will keep it about their person 24/7, 365. And just to add throw a few more statistics at you, penetration among 12 to 15-year-olds in the UK is now at 62% and rising. And also one of the fastest growing adoption rates is at the other end of the age spectrum in the over 55. So never before, probably not since the birth of the television, has one single technology had such broad appeal right across the age demographic. And as I say, it's really the 16 to 34-year-old age group that most people are keen to get a hold of. Why is that? It's what I call the I generation, and something else that hasn't gone massively largely reported is that if you think about it, since 2012, so in the last 2 years, and from here on in, every single student graduating from our schools, colleges and universities will have conducted their entire education in the internet area. Free access to online information has been a fundamental component of their learning and development. They play their lives out on social media, and virtually every aspect of their behavior, and certainly most of their interaction with the commercial world, is governed by technology. For this generation, the digital is the default for everything. Their relationship with technology is symbiotic. It doesn't just influence them, but increasingly they are the ones who are shaping the way the technology evolves. That is why they're the consumers that every company and brand wants to engage with. And therefore, with knowledge comes empowerment, and a notable characteristic of this demographic is a far stronger sense of control over their lifestyle and career balance. Saw a great article in the London edition of Time Out a few weeks back, where they described this new generation as the Yolo Generation, what they call the "you only live once" generation. That they really live their lives for today. And you can see down the right-hand side there are a whole bunch of characteristics, about these people. They're quite strong-minded, but they hold quite high values. They have a passion for lifelong learning once they get out of school. They love to travel. They like to check, the sourcing of the goods they buy, and to confirm other research that you see, notably the Kelsey consumer research. They tend to consult with lots of devices and channels and with each other before they make a purchase. And they like to engage with cool brands, and some of these will be familiar to those of you in North America. But there's some real global brands in here. Brands like Red Bull. If you like to be associated with this new demographic, Innocent, which is a very popular drinks brand here in the UK. Zappos, I know, always gets highly raved about by these guys, and also having spent some time in Japan last year. Docomo would be another brand that has kind of pioneered this way forward. The next couple of slides I'm not going to dwell on, but they're more a test, because I'm going to show you a bunch of logos of popular digital brands. It'd be interesting to know how many of them you could guess without having to research them. And more interesting enough, a great exercise might be to put some of these in front of your senior leaders and see how many people on your board can identify with these brands. There's 20 on each page. I'm not going to go through them now because we don't have time. But on this first page, these are 20 of the world's allegedly top 40 digital brands. And here are a few, another 20. Maybe you do really have to be quite digitally literate to understand some of these, but it's an interesting little exercise to see how many of them you can easily and readily identify with if you're going to consider yourself to be a digital-first consumer. As I said, when I mentioned a little while ago, how this generation operates, they do tend to flip between devices and between channels. The term omnichannel has become sort of one of the world's latest buzzwords for the world of digital. And what's interesting, particularly, and many companies are picking up on this, is the interaction and the switching that these people have between the online and the offline world. It's interesting to see Amazon investing quite a lot of money, particularly here in the UK right now, in click and collect stores, where you'll go and make the purchase online, but you'll physically go and pick it up from somewhere. Maybe to acknowledge that there are still issues in distribution and logistics, but the whole concept of online to offline and click and collect, are again other buzzwords that accompany this omni-channel experience. And just to endorse that, everywhere you look, everyone will tell you, every report you read, is that the path to purchase has become incredibly fragmented, and depending on whose data you look at, as I just said, the modern consumer is likely to consider anywhere between 5 and 8 different sources, from discovery right through to final decision and purchase. This slide just endorses that previous point about the confluence of online and offline, referred to by many observers as O2O, or the rapid growth in C&C, click and collect. And as I say, many retailers are now starting to recognize the critical importance of this whole dynamic. One of the big department store chains we have here in the UK, John Lewis, is a great exponent of delivering an excellent in-store and online experience, and their consumers are gravitating towards them away from some of the more mainstream department stores. Just to throw some numbers at you on this whole e-commerce piece and how this digital-first generation are just driving a whole new dynamic in e-commerce and purchasing. Just to put some numbers on it, of all connected consumers, 2/3 of them have now made at least one purchase online. This is data from eMarketer. Last year, global e-commerce transactions were valued at €1 trillion. That's just over $1 trillion. I think a euro is just above a dollar these days, about $1.2, 1.3, 1.25, something like that. So you can say that's about $1.25 trillion US dollars. And more significantly, that figure is expected to more than double within the next 4 years. And one of the key implications of that, particularly in this online world, is that these people who are online, who are connected, they like to share their experiences. They don't just purchase online, they like to tell their friends and sometimes the world of their experience, be it good, bad, indifferent. And perhaps it's this open and transparent, nothing hidden dynamic of the digital world that makes it a necessity for any company, large or small, to ensure that you're properly represented online. And how do you go about that? Well, I'm sure I'm speaking to an already converted audience, but put it into context, there are still around about 30% of companies out there who are still to get online and get engaged in this world. And I'm of the view that we are fast reaching the point, if we're not there already, where participation is no longer optional. It's pretty much mandatory. And in terms of your basic entry ticket to play in the new economy, you need essentially connectivity and communications, or put, just simply telephony, broadband, email, and a website. So fixed and or online, mobile telephony, some high-speed broadband, email capability, a hosted website with some basic SEO. That's your ticket to play. Beyond that, is going to reside an optional portfolio of different media, different marketing tools, business efficiency solutions. We're all dabbling and playing with different ones, but before you can get into any of that, obviously you need your basic entry ticket. And particularly if you're a large organization or an established local company, it's certainly becoming increasingly relevant to engage some kind of formal or managed approach to protecting your reputation online. As I said a minute ago, regardless of however you think the experience you may have just delivered to a consumer, if they don't like it, they can go on, they can go online very quickly, and they can damage your reputation very, very quickly. So you want to be in a position where you can manage, or at least mitigate and respond to what people are saying about you. All I would say is that it is one of the unavoidable downsides of the internet, is its openness to exploitation by unscrupulous companies or disillusioned individuals. Some of them often do act maliciously or with misguided motives, and therefore, until there's some kind of formal policing of the social media, businesses of all sizes, large and small, will need to take some control over how they manage their reputation. And here I'd just like to throw in a simple customer experience insight. Certainly, over the last decade, one of the sort of key things in many large companies is single view of the customer. We must have a single view of the customer. Well, that's fine, and that's absolutely correct and relevant. But one of the things that the digital economy is showing loud and clear is that particularly large companies, where in this omnichannel world people can engage with you through multiple sources, it's also incumbent on companies to ensure that you present outwards a single view of your company to those consumers, and make sure that the consumer experience is pretty consistent and positive, regardless of which channel they use you. It's pointless, having a wonderful in-store experience and the most wonderful staff and everything, and then people can go online and try and purchase online, and they find out that it takes ages to load up your website or to make a purchase or whatever. You need to make sure that your customer experience is fairly consistent, regardless of which channel they engage you by. But just sticking with this single view metaphor for a minute, it does underline the growing importance of data and business intelligence as you run a large company these days. If you look at it, the world's very best companies are those who tend to know their customers better than their competitors. I find it amazing that a company like Amazon has been named the world's most customer-centric company for each of the past 2 years. Yet the chances are that very few of us have ever even met or spoken to anybody from Amazon. The reality, of course, is that they just know you better than most other people. They're incredibly proficient at the way they capture data about you, not just you, but your friends, what you like, what you dislike, what your friends like and dislike, and then they intelligently use that data to fire back, intelligent interactions with you, engaging with you at times when you might be receptive to a marketing message, and hey presto, before you know it, you've made another purchase, they've made another sale, ka-ching. So clearly we need to start thinking about, or some companies need to start thinking about how they face out to this new world. And what is not in any doubt, is that things like e-commerce, ratings and reviews, big data, they are shaping the business landscape. And therefore it does mean reinventing your strategy, or starting to think about how you are going to continue to remain salient for your customers. And clearly embarking on a new strategic direction is a risky decision. Yeah, I would equally contend that doing nothing is probably an even riskier stance to take. There's many lessons and case studies, not least from within the Yellow Pages industry. I speak from experience. When initially confronted by disruption created by the internet and search engines, many publishers, certainly the one that I was involved in, we took what we considered to be the lowest risk decision at the time, which was to simply, go with the flow and try and evolve to meet the challenges presented by the online world. Yet if you look today at those who've kind of ridden the wave better than any of their peers, or the ones that seem to have evolved or come through transformation more successfully, it tends to be those who took the decision to almost reinvent and build a new company alongside the traditional business. And just to put it into context, this whole New World thing, I love this quote from Bezos, which is, if you think about those companies who build their businesses around the needs and wants and desires of customers, particularly your future strategies, and think about this for your own company. Your brand is only as good as what other people say about it when you're not present. I think part of the reason why that Bezos quote is so relevant is this. It doesn't really matter how local or specialized your business is. Your presence on the internet is permanent. It's no different to having a shop that's open all day and all night and positioned on every street corner in every country in the world. The consequence of it is that every company, however large or small, has to review and examine how they communicate and engage with customers and how they remain competitive in a world that is just continuing to be disrupted. What every company on the planet can no longer ignore, as I've said, is that the modern consumer is greatly empowered, considerably more empowered, unlike ever before. If they can't find the product they want from you, they'll just do a bit more research and find it from someone else. Pricing is so transparent these days. And the other thing we have to consider as business people is that every single customer we deal with is unique. And with the increased fragmentation of media and the proliferation of different access channels to information, it's pretty safe to say that from here on in, no two customers we have are ever likely to be the same. Another key demand of the new world, in my opinion, is that we need a new set of metrics and KPIs by which companies and brands measure their success. This whole customer engagement dynamic continues to change, so with it is the need for companies to reassess how you gauge and quantify how well you're doing. Some of you may know I spent a few years of my life in Yale Group in the late 90s and early 2000s working on acquisitions and alliances. Yet, 12, 15 years on from those days, all I can say is that the valuation metrics that we used to use as part of our due diligence program are considerably different to what they once were. Let me just give you one example, which is the recent acquisition of this company by Facebook. And let me just put it into context here for a minute. And all these numbers come from Business Insider. So what is WhatsApp? WhatsApp is a Mountain View, California-based instant messaging social media site. As at March of this year, it employed 55 people, had revenues of less than 20 million, and to date has yet to make a cent in profit. And yet, Mark Zuckerberg thought it was worthy enough to pay 19 billion, yes, 19 billion, to acquire that company. And I should add here that a lot of business commentators at the time still considered this to be quite a smart acquisition. Why? So let's look at it again, but with another set of metrics. WhatsApp has 450, well, as at March, it had 450 million active users. That number, I can say, has now risen to around 500 million. Of those 450 at the time, 315 million of those used the app every single day of the week. WhatsApp user base is growing by 1 million users every day. What's more, 10 billion messages get posted across its network every day. And according to Business Insider, WhatsApp is the fastest growing company in history. So it can be contended, therefore, that Facebook has made a pretty smart move. It just, it's bought a company that was most likely to eat its own lunch. Yet, it's defined that company by a completely different set of metrics, that most of us who used to get engaged in traditional M&A activity would measure a company by. Facebook, as I say, we're not turned on by revenue, margin, PE ratios, earnings multiples. The digital economy, dictates that we exist in a world where the lead indicators of value are often quite different. And I'm not going to go through them all, but I've listed here, the kind of measures that people look at today. Private equity companies tend to look at companies in terms of their digital intensity, their online reputation. How good are they at scaling and growing customers? So these are much softer measures, causal indicators and behaviors that tend to get examined much more diligently than previously. And this insight is kind of borne out by the MIT study that I referred to, where they looked at digital transformation in large companies, making a similar point. And they even go as far to say that another key indicator, particularly, is to look at the reward and remuneration packages of the senior executive team. But I don't have time really to go into that today. One study I do always pay a lot of attention to is this one. In the current edition of the Harvard Business Review, there's a big piece on blue ocean leadership. That refers to this, also to this study by Gallup. It's conducted every 2 years, and they also conclude, and you can see the quote there: the world's top performing organizations understand that employee engagement is a force that drives performance outcomes. Some companies don't really worry about too much about their employees. Gallup are saying those that really invest in their workforce and positively engage them in the transformation process are likely to achieve far greater success than those who don't. And they describe your employees, they fit into one of three brackets. You're either positively engaged, positively not engaged, positively engaged, actively disengaged, or just not engaged at all. And their averages say that in most companies, engaged employees rank around 30%. Not engaged employees, which are those who are just doing a job and taking a salary, 50%. But actively disengaged people, either laggards or people who are being carried by others, account for around 20%. If you look in the world's top organizations, they say that positively engaged figure needs to be at least 2/3 of your workforce. So it's pretty clear that a lot of work needs to be done by many companies in terms of how they embrace their employees. And I would just throw in here that what that Gallup study tells me is that those companies who invest in people and talent, and don't just say it but prove it in the way they offer their reward packages, their benefits packages, they do see their people as an appreciating asset in this world and a key source of differentiation. And that's certainly would be one of my key insights in terms of what companies have to do to embrace this new economy. One other is this, and that is to invest in innovation. Staying still, as I've said, is akin to moving backwards. So you do need to invest in new ideas to continually improve your product offering, but particularly to keep your customer experience salient and relevant to this new audience. Excuse me for just 5 seconds while I just take a quick drink. So another insight I would throw in is that entrepreneurial talent definitely needs to be nurtured and encouraged, because that too becomes a differentiator in a world where it's increasingly competitive. And to go on to one of my perennial bugbears, having worked with many large companies, it's not about your strategy, it's about how you execute it. I can say little more on that. That's not a new insight. In fact, if I go back to, around 300 or 400 years BC, even good old Aristotle was saying that, excellent execution is everything. Having a great vision and an accompanying strategic approach is absolutely meaningless if you lack the capability, to apply the same rigorous effort to effectively execute and implement. And this kind of brings me on to one of the next sort of key takeouts from this piece of work. This is an old Eskimo, Inuit Eskimo saying, the speed of the leader determines the rate of the pack. It's all about having, a visionary guy at the top of the organization. This Eskimo proverb is so apt because in terms of that culture, how they select the lead dog determines the pace at which all the other dogs in that pack will run at. So if you appoint a slow guy or a limp guy, as the lead dog, then everyone else, guess what? They run limp as well. So picking that lead dog, I think, is a really apt metaphor for the modern boardroom. And if you look at the world's great companies, and this is just a stock picture, I have no idea who that guy is, but if anyone does, I'd love to meet him. But a strong visionary CEO, is the linchpin of most great companies. You can define a great company, by an inspirational CEO, because the CEO, particularly in driving the change that is needed for today's workplace, he's the one who's going to align the senior team. He then brings the workforce together to get behind the vision. He's the one who goes out and communicates it, he articulates it, and he evangelizes the workforce to go out and execute the plan. In my view, transformation simply cannot and does not happen unless it's driven from the very top. But what else has to exist in the senior team? One other thing I would add is that silos cannot exist in a digitally mature, customer-focused company. But you are going to need more than just a great CEO. If you look at, and I apologize up front for the how wordy this slide is, but this has been doing the rounds now for a year or two. From a post that sort of kind of went viral a couple of years back around sort of the key positions required in the modern boardroom. The hustler, the hacker, the designer, and again, I'm not going to read through them in massive detail, but from the top, the hustler, you just need a good go-to guy, someone who breaks down walls and makes things happen, someone who can make deals that you never thought were possible. Alongside him, you need somebody who understands the modern IT world, the hacker. Somebody who can write code or build, great technical products that that are better than anybody else's. And then alongside that, I suppose the modern role for the marketing guy or the sales guy or the customer service guy would be to have a great UX person, somebody who really understands user experience and customers and can build and deliver great product and services experiences around them. And the CEO, he's clearly the visionary, and he's the one who aligns that whole team and then galvanizes the whole organization around the delivery of the plan. Another maxim is, thinking big and acting small. Large company, speed to market, agility. They're all modern buzzwords. And this whole maxim of thinking big and acting small isn't new, yet it is particularly highly relevant. Just give you another example from the Yellow Pages industry. Who's the real competition out there? I sit in a lot of boardrooms and I ask that question, and most often the answer I get is Google. Yet when I look at where all the customers are going to buy their money from Google and where the spend is going, it's to the myriad of small corner design shops and SEO houses that are popping up all over the place, who are interacting with Google on behalf of the local merchant, and they're the people who, in my opinion, are eating a large portion of the Yellow Page publisher's lunch, not Google directly. That's something for you to consider. And while we're on the subject of business thinking, here's another challenge to conventional practice, particularly in large companies. It's all around managing cost and overhead, which I acknowledge is of course critically important. Yeah, I'm not for 1 minute attempting to undermine that point, but I will say this. You know, it's become almost a default position in many companies when you're faced with a revenue challenge or margin or dividend challenge to immediately revert to cost cutting. And that invariably means headcount reduction or in some degree of outsourcing or offshoring. But I just throw 5 quick tips at you. You know, when cutting costs in your organization, never cut fat or muscle. You know, never cut muscle, only cut fat. Ask yourself the question, will the outsourcing initiative enhance or add value to my end customer experience? If the answer is no, don't do it. Before cutting heads, see if there's a way you can redeploy those heads in a more added value role. Never outsource a relationship or service function, no matter how good the external company. I'll lay a bet with you that they'll never represent your brand as well as your own people. And my final point would be that it's, from certainly the evidence I've seen, it's extremely hard to execute a growth strategy by starting with cost cutting. Which brings me to another old world large company boardroom habit that is often difficult to offload, and that is one that sadly I've witnessed close up too many times in this industry. And that is that too many large companies place far too high a priority and emphasis on revenue and margin generation instead of remaining competitive or staying in tune to the demands of the customer. And I think this quote says it perfectly. You know, and the winners in the new economy are those who certainly will have both eyes fixed firmly on the ball and not on the scoreboard. So let's just summarize for a minute. Digital-first consumers increasingly want to engage with digital-first companies, and for that to happen, you need a digital-first leadership team. In the old world, you know, there was a pyramidical organizational model, top-down hierarchical decision-making, and an operating culture residing in silos. That just has to be abolished. In the new world, you need flatter, leaner structures, SBUs aligned around customer segments, and collaboration right across the organization. What I am not advocating, by the way, is a boardroom full of 20-somethings in short trousers. There's always going to be a need for wisdom and experience in the senior ranks of any organization, however large or small. But I am saying that digital first is much more about your culture, your mindset, and your approach than necessarily being an age issue. So before I conclude, I just want to refer quickly again to that MIT study that I mentioned. You know, they cite the very best digitally transformed companies as excelling in 6 key areas shown here. 3 of them are internal to the organization, 3 of them are external. The most important, perhaps, is the delivery of a compelling and positive customer experience. And social media and increasingly mobile, you know, are going to be 2 of the most important channels in how you do that. And then in terms of your back office, you need to be tightly aligned with close collaboration across your functions with no silos. Data and analytics increasingly play a great part, seamlessly shared and viewed across all your customer touchpoints, and your accompanying processes are going to be slick and best in class. And here's just a few quickie statements to finish with to help sharpen your mind. For all of what I've just said, never ignore the fact that 80% of all commerce still happens locally. It's just that we do operate in a world today where the old rules have been thrown out the window, and I've not seen anybody write any new rules. And I guess it's unlikely that any new rules will actually get written. One adage that I stand by for any company going about transformation: put the customer at the heart of what you do. More important than any single thing else I've talked about is to know your customer. I've referred a couple of times to Amazon, and I was privileged, a guy who used to work for me now works for them, and he shared with me a document that you get when you join that company on day one. It's called the Amazon Leadership Principles, and number 1 is that quote there: Amazon leaders obsess about customers. You know, I've not had too many bad experiences with any company that obsesses about its customers. For those of you who employ salespeople, you know, I apologize again for delivering a wordy chart, but you know, it's important, I think, that you get the message This chart is important. Customer engagement in the digital world calls for a fundamental, shift in emphasis from what used to be the old inward-focused, product-driven model of the past to one in the new world where you just spend, the whole thing is about the relationship with the customer. And the only way you build a relationship with anybody, in or out of your work life, is by asking them lots of questions, finding out about them. Build up your knowledge and your insight about your customer, and then they begin to trust you. They understand your solution, and then getting them to buy it is actually the easiest part of the deal. Where I go back 25, 30 years to to the old world of selling, where half the call was about your sales presenter and closing hard around overcoming objections and so forth. So how do you know if you've got it right? Well, ultimately your customers are going to tell you, but one thing is for sure, simply just satisfying the customer might not be enough. The winners in this new world are those who can wow and thrill their customers. And all that's changed is that customer expectations have risen to a level that many of us would consider to be unprecedented to what they were in the past. So therefore, to bring this whole piece to a close, I just want to say that responding to the demands of this this new world dynamic, the challenges, and also the opportunities, massive opportunities that this new economy throw up for us. They're going to be different for every company, but I'll say this: how you approach it is undeniably going to be common across every company, and it is, as I just said, a mindset thing. It's about your corporate attitude, the behaviors that you display, and the way you face out to them, through all your touch points, the way you deal with your people, your partners, and your suppliers, and therefore it becomes your overarching culture, which is what I call, the whole ABC of things. Those that have seen any of my presentations before know that I like to finish with a quote. I also think some of the best quotes are those that transcend the context in which they were originally made, and I love this one from Gretzky. When asked what made him so good, he always, because of course he always appeared to have much more time on the puck than anyone else who played the game, and he gave this seminal response: "I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it is now." That metaphor is so apt and is no different, just as highly relevant for the modern business world. The most successful companies are those who see the trends before anyone else. Better still, you drive those trends and you help to shape the future. So to conclude, I'd just like to say thank you very much for listening to me for the last 45 minutes. I hope you've found it to be interesting to some degree. It's a topic I feel very passionate about. I wish all of you listening well on your own journey into this exciting digital economy that we're now all a part of. My concluding statement is this: digital-first consumers increasingly want to engage with digital-first companies and brands. But for that to happen, a digital-first company needs to be governed by a digital-first leadership team and boardroom. And I sincerely hope that yours is one of those. Thank you very much.
Why does it appear to be so difficult for some companies to adapt to this digital change?
Well, change isn't easy. Even small change isn't easy. I know. It's like, we all feel as though we have to do it. But we're comfortable with where we are. The best analogy I can do is, when you're walking around with a pair of shoes that are falling apart with holes in the bottom. We know we need a new pair of shoes, but we don't like throwing off the old ones because we're comfortable in them. And we know that new shoes are stiff and tight and give us blisters. But the longer you wear and walk in those new shoes, then it becomes comfortable. And again, it's another great analogy that kind of works for the business world. We become comfortable with where we're at, but in reality, we still have to move forward. And sooner or later, when the leather's gone completely on the shoes, it's often too late. You know, and in fairness, I would say that in the past, you know, certainly over the last 15, you know, bearing in mind the internet is not new now, you know, it's been around for more than 20 years. You know, the need to change hasn't been as great as it is now. You know, what we're seeing now, you know, endorsed by pretty much every business magazine you read, you know, and you've only got to sit in a railway station or an airport or a bus station. You know, everyone you see is interacting with smartphones, and I think the emergence of the smartphone and the tablets really has been a game changer. You know, and all the things that people can now do with that handheld device make the world a considerably different place to what it was just 10 years ago.
Is there a company in the local search industry you feel is best in class with respect to being digital first?
Well, there's a couple I think have made a reasonably good fist of it. I mean, the one obvious one that I would call digital first, mainly because it's digital only, is Zap Group in Israel. That was the old Golden Pages, yellow, you know, the old print business in Israel was Golden Pages. They took the decision. Well, they've been dabbling in digital for some years, but they took the very bold and courageous step 2 years ago to kill print, and they launched their new business across a number of different verticals. They transformed their organization pretty much in the way that that I described in the presentation, and how the MIT Sloan study said you should go about it, which is essentially build a new company alongside the old one, and they got, you know, considerable buy-in from their workforce. Of course, you know, you don't go through any of this without a few casualties, and there were one or two who, you know, who wanted to stick with the old, and you know, you can't carry passengers, as I said, but Zap would be a good one. I think if you're looking at the really larger publisher businesses, I think So Local in France have done a reasonably good job. They're still not, you know, completely through their journey yet, but they now have a business that is kind of 70% plus digital, and they still have a very profitable and still sizable print business that delivers them a lot of good margin. But, you know, they're still operating at around 45–46% margin on a business that's 72% digital. So that would indicate to me that they would also be a company that, you know, you would consider to be a reasonable role model for this industry.
Why is your message so important now compared to the changed messages we've heard in the past?
Yeah, that's easier. You know, I would put that mainly down to what I was saying earlier. I think the fact that so many consumers now have so much purchasing power at the end of their fingertips, not just when they're sat at their desk at home in the evening or at work, but the fact that they carry it around with them 24/7. You know, 94% of people with one of these devices is keeping it about their person 24/7, 365. That for me is a game changer. You know, I mean, you know, I was only out last weekend, you know, around a store, and you know, and there's people with, you know, with a red laser app, you know, reading the barcodes, you know, on products, you know, on furniture, you know, just seeing where they can get the best price. You know, i.e., is this place where I'm standing here looking at it right now? Are they offering the best price on this? Because all they'll do is get the physical experience in store. You know, they use a QR code or a barcode reading device on their mobile, and they can immediately, you know, say, is this the best place to purchase this? Otherwise, I'm just going to go back home and order it cheaper online. You know, that for me is a game-changing technology.
If we agree that we need to change and it's inevitable in the light of what we're seeing, where do we start?
Look, and you know, I've gone on record of having said this many, many times. The small business community that we have handheld and chaperoned for the last, you know, 100+ years, you know, they need as much help, if not more, today than they have ever needed before. If you think getting to grips with all this is complex for us, and we're supposed to be people who know it, you know, and I only get to know it because it's my job to know it, and I have to read a lot and I have to interact with a lot of these things. It's a struggle for me. And I go down my local pub on a Friday and I drink my beer with most of my mates run businesses, and they look at me, a 55-year-old man, and say, how the hell do you know about all this stuff? I say, well, I have to, and of course, but they need just as much help, today as they've ever done. And so where do we start? We start by making sure that we're employing some digital savvy, smart people who like talking to other people. It doesn't have to be, it's not all about being a fantastic sales closer. It's not all about being, the best prospector in town. But if you've got, digitally savvy people who can convey almost, you almost need people who are better at teaching than they are selling. People who can convey a message very simply and very concisely and take what is, after all, a very complex subject. Trying to weave together the idiosyncrasies of social media, search engines, SEM, mobile. It's not an easy task. But there are kids out there. I'm just in the process of updating my own website, and the guy who's done it for me, spoke to me in a language that he made it easy for me to understand. And that's where we start. We start employing, really good, smart people who can build relationships and regain the trust that some people in this industry have lost.
Thanks for conducting today's webinar, Paul. We really appreciate all the info. I'd also like to thank everyone for attending today. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to contact us at LSA, and we can connect you with today's presenter. For more info on the upcoming webinars, visit localsearchassociation.org/webinars. So with that, thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.